Well, hello, welcome once again to Pale Blends and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. John Kongos is an Austin, Texas-based South African-born singer, songwriter, producer, and composer, most known for his 1971 hit, He's Going to Step on You Again. Tracing back his very colorful recording career, John began in the early 60s with the Dukes, who changed their name to Johnny Kongos and the G-Men. In 1967, John formed Floribunda Rose, which released just one single, Linda Loves Linda. In 1968, Floribunda Rose gave way to Scrugg, who released three pop psych singles. In 1969, John was ready to pursue a solo career, and he recorded his first solo album, Confusions About A Goldfish, and then a second self-titled release in 1972. In later years, Mr. Kongos worked as a record producer, sound engineer, he wrote TV jingles, and composed theme music. John currently lives in Austin, Texas. It seems John has passed on the musical gene to his progeny. His four sons are the members of the alternative rock band bearing the family namesake, Kongos, also based in Austin. Well, welcome, John.
Hey, Greg. Thank you for having me. This is my first Texas interview. Could be the last.
And we'll see. Let's wait till we're done, and then you can make that judgment.
Yeah.
Well, John, take us back to the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa, in hate to say it, well, I'm happy to say it actually, 1945, and. As I said, in the inimitable words of Keith Richards, I'm happy to be anywhere.
Do you have any childhood memories of living there?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, you see, I only left South Africa. Finally, I went to the UK once or twice before, but then I left when I was about 20 years old to live in the UK. So, a long time ago, but I have obviously many memories about South Africa. And also I used to go back to South Africa at least once a year because my mother was there and my sort of the extended family, but I have no brothers and sisters. I might have a half brother or sister somewhere around, but I don't know them. But I would go back and, be with my mom and our immediate family there.
Okay. Well, early on, do you remember hearing music in the house?
Music was very much part of my upbringing in the sense that my mom was a brilliant person. She was completely self-educated. She literally left school at the age of 12, having written her own school leaving note. My grandmother, her mother, was illiterate from Greece. She could not speak English, and she could not read or write even in Greek. So when letters used to come from the school saying that your daughter is either missing or absent or doing well or whatever, she would ask my mom to read all the letters. So when my mom was actually absent and no longer attending school, she would say to my grandmother, "Yep, everything's great. Your kid's doing really well. We're happy to have her here." And then when she decided she wasn't going back to school anymore, she wrote her own school leaving note, and my grandmother didn't find out for about 9 months.
Oh, is that right?
But she became one of the most educated, well-read people I've known. She was really amazing.
Well, how about your dad? Was he musically inclined, or where'd you
My
get
dad. This is a joke, but it's true. I met my dad twice. Once at conception.
Okay.
And then once when I was 17 years old, when he came to visit my mom, who was now a successful businesswoman, having literally come through great poverty in her life. She was now a successful businesswoman, and he looked her up and he came to see her because he wanted to borrow some money. So I did not know him. And in fact, when he came and he was sitting in my mom's office, I happened to walk in and they were chit-chatting, and she got this strange look on her face, sort of embarrassed. And I said, when he left, I said, so who was that guy? Because his name was Chris. I said, who was that guy? And she kind of didn't answer immediately. And I said, wait a minute, was that my dad? And she couldn't actually say yes. So I said, wow, okay, that's amazing. So that was when I was 17. That was the second meeting, and I know nothing else about him since.
Okay.
And I doubt he was musically inclined.
Okay. I didn't know your background as far as your lineage like that. Well,
yeah.
What was the first musical instrument you learned to play?
When I was 12, she bought me a guitar because we went to see a little acoustic guitar, which unfortunately I happened to get rid of. Big mistake. It was a real cheapo thing. We went to see a guy called Tommy Steele, who is a British a singer, songwriter, actor. He became, a big actor in Britain. If you look him up, Tommy Steele, one of the big stars of the 50s. So we went to see him at the Johannesburg Town Hall, and he had big, sort of flowing blonde hair, and he used to shake his head a lot, and his hair went all over the joint. And I just thought, wow, I want to do that, So I asked her to buy me a guitar, and she did. And got me some lessons, and that was the start of it all.
Yeah. Can you remember your first or one of your first singles or albums that you bought?
Bought? Yeah, it would have been. Well, first of all, she was into a lot of the sort of light classical stuff, as well as people like Mario Lanza. And so Mario Lanza, as you are probably aware, is considered to be a great opera singer. In fact, he was not a great opera singer by any means, not in the Pavarotti, Placido Domingo, and all these guys, not in their league at all. He often sang out of tune. But Hollywood loved him, and he made a whole bunch of movies. So she would buy some of those albums. And so I grew up listening to a lot of that stuff, as well as a lot of the film type stuff. Now, in my day, of course, I can remember literally when the first so-called LP became available, which my mom bought. And I think it might have been called the Student Prince, from a movie called The Student Prince, and it starred Mario Lanza. But they didn't use him in the film because he had become too fat. So they used an actor, I believe his name was Edmund Purdom or something like that. So he was a good-looking dude, and they dubbed Mario Lanza's voice into Edmund Purdom. So that was a movie that we watched, saw, and then we listened to that album, constantly. That would have been the first album, and then of course after that came a whole bunch of the Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis and people like that,
Okay. So those are some early influences.
Absolutely, yeah. See, South Africa was really, really heavily into American country music and American cowboy music, and certainly American rock and roll. So that's what I grew up with. We had a jukebox in a business when I was 9 years old. There was a jukebox in the little dining room that we had there, and people would play, and I would just listen to it all day long and loved it. So I was hearing all the American and British hits of the time through that jukebox.
Oh, gotcha. Well, was there any kind of a music scene there in Johannesburg when you were a teen? Any kind of...
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you're probably aware of the apartheid was very much in place at the time.
Yeah.
It only officially went away. Only really officially went away after Mandela was released. So that's in the 90s. But in the 50s, 60s, 70s, apartheid was, very much in place. So there was a lot of music, but it was happening separately. And you could, and as a kid, as I say, we had this business where it was a late night business. So I would often be up at 12, 1, 2, 3, literally 3 in the morning. We used to close sometimes at 2 in the morning, and then there'd be a whole bunch of cleaning up and so on. Now, we could go, at that time, we could go out to what was called the townships, and we would go and listen to black music from the townships. And it was not illegal, but it was kind of frowned upon. But nevertheless, a lot of people did it, and I was, together with some of my uncles and friends and so on, they would take me out as I guess a 10-year-old. I was about 10 years old, and we'd go and listen to African township music, and it had a big influence on me because it was just it was amazing music.
Yeah, yeah. Well, did you have any firsthand? I was going to talk about our apartheid. Any firsthand experience?
Oh
With
yeah,
apartheid? Yeah.
sure, absolutely. I guess one of the more interesting sort of anecdotes is that when I was 16, the band, the G-Men, Johnny and the G-Men, we were on the road and doing a longish tour of South Africa, and we were due to play in Durban at a show which was designated a so-called white show. Now, at this white show, you could blacks were not allowed. Blacks and or Indians, any person of color was not allowed to attend that show. But we wanted to do a show for the Indians and the so-called coloreds, and that's what they refer to themselves as now in South Africa. Still, they don't necessarily say black or white. Some of them are actually coloreds, and colored means in South Africa, colored means white parentage, half white parentage, and black parentage. And it's not a derogatory term at all in South Africa. They embrace it. So we wanted to do a show for them. So we arranged a show in the Indian part of town of Durban. And at that show, there was a band that was sort of opening up for us. There was a South African band called The Flames.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
you aware of
Yeah.
them?
Yeah, I've heard of them. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Because this is really a direct connection to my experience, some of my experience with the apartheid system out there.
Okay.
So in this band was a 9-year-old drummer, and the other guys were, I don't know, 16 to 18. Now, the 9-year-old drummer was called Ricky, and the other guys were called Brother and Steve Fatar, Fatar, Fatar. Now they went on much later, and I'll get into that. But at that time, they were a band opening for us. Now, we did this gig where they opened for us, and we got to know them. And interestingly enough, the Flames were later, they came to London, and I happened to be in London at the time, and they played a club, I think called the Speakeasy, or one of the other clubs, the Revolution maybe, a club called the Revolution, both very big clubs in London. And I went to see them, and we hooked up again and reminisced about this time when I was 16 and the drummer was 9. Now, at that time, they were trying to make it in London, and the Beach Boys heard of them, and I think were in London. Some of them were in London at the time, and they decided to embrace this band called the Flames, and they literally took them to the States. They paid all of their expenses. They made albums with them in the States. They signed them to their label. And, they were being very helpful to this band that had suffered, apartheid and so on. So Ricky Fatar went on to be one of the big sought-after drummers in the States. Today, he still plays with Bonnie Raitt, particularly, and a bunch of other artists. He played with the Stones. He worked with the Stones. He definitely toured with the Beach Boys. They made albums. They kind of, helped them enormously. Then the guy called Steve Fatar, he, in fact, this is interesting because now I can go to, I can just walk in my studio here, and I'm going to show you something.
Sure.
I mentioned, because this connects to the story.
Good.
So here is this little Martin guitar. It's a kind of 3/4 size Martin guitar. It's very old. Steve Fatar was given this guitar by the Beach Boys.
Okay.
When he came, let me close this door. When he came to London, this is a convoluted story. So
right.
I meet my wife, my current wife, in London in the 1970s, because I used to go to this restaurant which was opposite Olympic Studios, where the Stones used to record, the Beatles recorded there as well, is in a place called Barnes in London. And it was a big, well-known studio, and it was a mile from my house where I had a studio. And she was working, she was on her way to Spain, my wife, and I never let her get there. She was working at a restaurant that was owned by a South African, right opposite Olympic Studios. And when we got together kind of immediately that we met. And one evening, she said to me, "There's a guy who works in the kitchen. He works in the scullery, actually, down in the basement, and he washes dishes. And his name is Brother, and he says he knows you." I said, "Yeah, okay, I do know her brother, because Steve Fattar used to be called Brother as well. He was one of the brothers." So so I said, "Yep, I do know him," and I found out about him. It turns out he was the guy that the Beach Boys gave this guitar to. He was now down and out and in London and literally washing dishes. So he got back from the States, you know. He also, unfortunately, and it's well known, so I'm not revealing anything. Later we found out he was a junkie. So he wanted to go to Amsterdam during the next few months that we were together. He wanted to go to Amsterdam because, you know, Amsterdam was a very open, liberal city, and he wanted to be there because that's what he was into. And so he wanted to sell the Martin guitar and a little accordion and one other little concertina kind of instrument. So I said, "Yeah, I'll buy them." I said, "Particularly, I'm really interested in the Martin." So I bought the Martin from him. He went to Amsterdam, and within about 3 weeks, he was dead. He died of an overdose of heroin. So, but that's the connection to that guitar, and also to apartheid and the Beach Boys and all that sort of stuff. And in fact, I hooked up with Steve Fattar again some years ago. He's also passed away now. I hooked up with him in Johannesburg, South Africa, because he was playing at a little bar club not far from my house in Johannesburg, where I still have that house.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Well, what other memories do you have of your time with the Dukes and the G-Men?
Well, you know, those were school days. We toured, we had a great time, and we had big success in the context of South Africa. So the context was that there were 3-4 million whites in South Africa, and perhaps 30 million blacks. And if you were a star in the white music business, it was tiny. You know, it was literally tiny. You could have a gold record by selling 25,000 singles, and that gave you a gold record, as it were. So that was very small. It was separated, you know. So there were crossovers occasionally, as I mentioned, but basically it was all that. So it was school, then out on the road, and I was supposed to go to university. That was the deal with my mom and me. And I said, "You know what? Let me take a year off, and we'll reconsider." So she said, "Okay." And I never did go back to school. I left school at the age of 16, and I never went to university. And my education started when I left school.
Okay, your real education, yeah.
Yeah, well, because I started to travel, and then I went overseas, and I was in the music business and theater and all that sort of thing, you know. So all of my thoughts broadened and widened.
Yes. Well, before we move on, I'm going to have to ask you about "This Is Johnny," about your 1963 solo album. Do you remember recording the recording session or sessions for that?
I kind of do. If I go back and look at the album cover and remember the songs, that'll.
It's a lot of cover tunes. I noticed
yeah.
that. There may be a few originals in there that I didn't recognize, but majority of cover.
Yeah. Let me just see.
Sure.
Johnny Kongos. This is Johnny. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. Sealed with a Kiss, Man in the Moon, Who Done It, Little Boy Crying, Jamaican Farewell, Enchanted Sea, Up on the Roof, Empty Birdcage, Loop de Loop, The Great Trek to Stronet. Okay, yeah. So this reminds me what that album had. So as you say, there were a bunch of covers there, and then a few originals that either I wrote as instrumentals or co-wrote with my mom, who could turn out a lyric in 5 minutes, on any subject.
Really?
So the notable, two of the notable tracks on that album were Tulips for Toinette and a song called Little Boy Crying. Both pretty young. I mean, I was 16 and 17 when this was being recorded. So Tulips for Toinette was a song that came about because there was this little girl who, she was about 11 or 12 years old, and she was a fan of the G-Men. And she was out at a park. I mean, this is, again, not longest story, but it's a long edition. So she was at a park playing with her friends, and they were on some swings, and she got off the swing and walked a little distance, and one of the swings hit her in the head. So she went into a coma kind of thing, and it died a few days later. And her parents, her mother in particular, made us aware of this event. So my mom wrote this lyric called Tulips for Toinette. Her name was Antoinette. And we recorded it as a dedication to her. And we gave the songwriting royalties and the record royalties to the upkeep of her grave and to any charity that her mother, wanted to designate to. So that's the story of the song Tulips for Toinette. The other song that was actually a hit is that was a big hit in South Africa. And to this day, if I meet someone who's old enough and alive, they will remember that song in connection with me, because it was such a big hit out there. And interestingly, it was produced by my producer at the time, who was a guy called Bill Walker. Now, Bill Walker was an Australian musician. He was a bit of a genius. He was a pianist. And he happened to be in South Africa, I guess because his wife was South African. And he became one of the big producers and or go-to MDs in South Africa. Again, connected to America, Jim Reeves, who, together with Floyd Kramer and with Chet Atkins, they came out to South Africa, and they were on the RCA. It's amazing how I can remember all this stuff. Ask me what happened yesterday, and it's not that easy. So they came out to South Africa to do a promotional tour, because there were big stars in South Africa. South Africa was really into American country music. And they were on RCA. I was also on RCA at the time. There was a subsidiary label called Teal, Teal Records. And that was a kind of subsidiary of RCA in South Africa. Now, Jim Reeves, Floyd Kramer, Chet Atkins, they were all on the RCA label. I was doing a gig with my band in a little town called Springs, about 30 miles outside of Johannesburg. And we were playing a big open air gig there. And the record company sent the three guys out to meet us and to be introduced on our stage to the audience. So Jim Reeves, Chet Atkins, who was my hero, I loved that guy. They all came on the stage. I shook hands with all of them. And I'm happy to say I shook hands with Chet Atkins because he was a genius. And so that too is just a connection with that time and that album, interestingly.
Yes. Well, some fond memories there for sure. Yeah. Well, what prompted the move to London? What, in '66 was it? 1966?
At the time, I went to London in '66, and I made a record there called I Love Mary, which was, not a great record, with Pi Records, because Pi was connected to RCA and Teal at the time in South Africa. So I met John Schroeder, who was a big producer. He went on to produce Pictures of Mass Sick Men. What do they call? Status Quo. So he did Status Quo and various other people. Helen Shapiro was a big British artist. So I hooked up with him. He was a really nice guy and, a fair producer. So I decided at that time I could not get a work permit in the UK as an individual. So the only way that I could get a work permit was to have a band that was largely British or Commonwealth citizens. So in other words, if we had 3/5 of the band not UK connected, not connected, but connected to the UK, then you could get a work permit for the whole band. So I went back to South Africa, and there happened to be a band called the 004 that was playing various of the clubs that that I was frequenting, and I met the guys, and they were a Welshman, a Londoner, and a Dutchman, Holland Dutchman type guy. And as well as then there was another guy who was a keyboard player. His name was Chris Demetrio, and he was a Cypriot. So he could be a British passport holder. So I talked to them all, and I said, "Hey guys, you want to come back to London? I'll pay all expenses. When we get there, we're a band. We'll decide what we're going to call ourselves. And I've got a recording contract waiting to take place with John Schroeder and Pi Records." And they said, "Yeah, great." So we got on a boat in Cape Town in, I think, 1966 with a few guitars and 1 or 2 amplifiers and that sort of thing. And we hit the UK. And we started, through Pi Records, I acquired a manager called Morris King, who was at the time the manager of the Walker Brothers. Big. They were Americans, but they were big stars, particularly in the UK. They were living in the UK. Scott Walker, John Walker, and Gary, I think his name was Gary Walker.
Right, and they weren't really brothers.
They were not brothers, correct. Scott Walker was the main driver and the great voice in that band, and also he was a superstar in terms of the way he looked and in terms of his intellectual capability, his songwriting, and that sort of thing. He was into French, Charles Aznavour, and various of the other French artists. So he fancied himself writing those kinds of songs as well. Not just the whole pop thing, but they had massive hits, as you're probably aware, like You've Lost That Loving Feeling, but it was one of the others. The sun ain't gonna shine anymore.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, big, massive hit. So I'm surprised that you're aware of that. So
I'll just tell you, I'm an Anglophile, big time. As far as music goes, yeah. So I know a lot. Yeah, quite a bit of that. I've collected quite a bit of that kind of.
So I got to meet all of those guys because the manager that I acquired there was the manager of the Walker Brothers, as well as he was an entrepreneur. He put on shows all over England, and he was a real. He was not unlike the Cray brothers in the sense that he was a kind of. Do you know the term barrow boy?
Yes.
You do. Okay, so you know from what it derives. Barrow boy is these guys who would be selling stuff at the various East End markets, and they'd be pushing their wares on barrows, and they became known as barrow boys or wide boys. That was another term for a barrow boy or a kind of criminal type person, because they were as wide as they were tall. So they were called wide boys. So Morris King was a bit of a wide boy, and it was interesting because through him, I also I met and shook hands with one of my great heroes, Jerry Lee Lewis, because I happened to be at the offices one day, and I was walking down the passageway, and up the passageway was coming this larger than life guy. He had a big kind of cowboy hat on. In fact, a cowboy hat. Yeah, it was a cowboy hat. He had a big cowboy hat on, and he stuck his hand out. He said, "Hey, how you doing?" And it was Jerry Lee Lewis. And I just thought, wow, what an amazing coincidence, that I meet this guy who literally I was listening to from the age of 9 or 10 years old. So he was out. Morris King brought him out to the UK to do a tour. Okay. And of course, I'm sure you're aware of all the Jerry Lee Lewis stories about the UK.
Yeah. Right. Well, you know what's interesting before you go on? in my interview previously and several that I've talked to, we had this sentiment about at an early age when these are your idols, musicians that you know collected their music and listened to. You never imagined that you would meet them someday,
No.
and then once you do, it's like it's surreal.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the one I'd love to have met, of course, would be Presley. Just because he was the so-called king at the time. I did meet a few of the people who knew him when I was in Memphis in 1976. I came over I came over to the US to try to sell some songs, and I went to Nashville and Memphis and so on with a co-writer of mine called Pete Leroy. Now we wrote a whole bunch of songs together, some of which were on Kongos' album, one or two, I think. A song called Jubilee Cloud we wrote, and that almost became a hit in the States. Step on You Again by Me was a minor hit in the States. Elektra dropped the ball, in fact, on that song because it was a massive hit everywhere, but not the States. And there could be political reasons that they decided to drop the ball, and I'll go into that later if necessary. But so I met Jack Holzman, who was the head of Elektra, and he signed me personally in the sense that he loved the record Step on You Again so much that he wanted to sign me and sign Gus Dudgeon and the forthcoming album, that sort of thing. So he came to London to do business with my publisher at the time, David Platts, and Gus Dudgeon on various other things, including signing me. So we decided to go with him as opposed to another one who was reaching out to us, a very, very big name, Jerry Weintraub. So Jerry Weintraub also loved the record Step on You Again, which they all heard down at Midem one January in south of France, where Gus took the record down to Midem before it was sold, and he was playing it, and everybody came and said, "Wow, what is that thing?" And we want it. So it was that record that was the spearhead for me in so many ways. Although I'd had success as a songwriter in the UK and Germany and France before then, but as an artist, Step on You Again was the one that opened the doors for me. So Jerry Weintraub wanted to sign me as well. So he gave us a deal, which was a very good deal. He offered us a deal, which was a very good deal in terms of money up front and all that sort of thing. But we decided to go with Jack Holzman because we just felt a little more comfortable with Jack Holzman. In retrospect, I don't know if it was the right move because Jerry Weintraub said, "I'll make you a big star in America." He said, "There'll be billboards on Sunset Boulevard and all that sort of thing." And of course, at that time, he was the manager of John Denver and what were they called? There was a band, Peter, Paul and Mary, I think. Right. So he was the manager of Peter, Paul and Mary and John Denver. So big, but not massive. He wasn't yet the guy who created the Karate Kid movies and did concerts with Sinatra and Presley and that sort of thing. He wasn't that big at that time. So we decided to go with Jack Holzman instead. Career-wise, might have been good to go with Jerry Weintraub. Money-wise, it was equal to go with Jack Holzman. So that's that.
Yeah. We'll go back to Floribunda Rose.
You keep bringing up these little things.
I wanted to know who coined the name and what's the meaning behind the Floribunda?
Oh boy, it's interesting because I just got a WhatsApp message from the bass player in the band at the time. We're still in communication. He's still alive. He's a year or two older than me. Good friend of mine. His name is Jack Russell. He was the bass player in Floribunda Rose and Scrugg and the original band in the UK. One of the guys I took back there, in fact. And we've been friends ever since. And we were trying to, it was flower power, okay? So flower power was happening. If you're going to San Francisco, we used to do that song on stage. And literally, we used to wear these robes and flowery kind of things, and it was all flower power. We were psychedelic wannabes, and we used to we used to play British working men's clubs up in the north of England, dressed like flower power idiots, and we literally used to throw out flowers even to these old working men who were drinking their beers, their Guinness and their lagers, warm beers, and they didn't understand what the hell we were doing, They thought that was a bit of a joke. But nevertheless, we thought this is it. So Floribunda Rose came out of a book. I guess we were researching what can we call the band. So we said, let's make it flower power-ish. And Jack came up with the idea of Floribunda Rose, to my embarrassment, all the way to today. What a name for a band.
Okay. Well, Linda Loves Linda is a song very much of its time. You talked about the flower power, and nice production on that one, I have to say.
It was almost a hit. It was a bit of a turntable hit, for a while. And coincidentally, that song was co-written with Jack Russell, my Welsh bass player.
Okay.
Who I'm still in contact with. Yeah.
Okay. Did he drop the terrier part of his name? Jack Russell. It was originally Jack Russell Terrier, right?
No, Jack Russell is a common name. But yes, you're right. Jack Russell is a common name in the UK. And of course, Jack Russell Terriers are well-known little hard cases.
Right. I'm sorry. I had to throw that one in there. Well, I do like the echoey vocals though on Linda Loves Linda. I like that.
Wow. Yeah.
That was a nice addition, I think, to that song. Well,
yeah, Jack had this really nice high voice.
Yeah.
And I believe still has. And so he would do the high harmonies there, and he was really good.
Yeah. Well, what was the lineup change that led to the reforming as Scrugg?
That came about because Doc, the drummer, who was the Dutch guy, decided that he had enough of going up and down the M4 in London and in the UK, from Scotland down to what was it called? Penzance, I think. We literally did like 500 miles one day, one gig in the north of Scotland, the next gig in the south, the most southerly point in England. And we each got about a pound or two out of that whole process. And we were not making money, and it was difficult. And he said, okay, this is it. I've had enough. I want out. So he decided just to leave the band. And we had some gigs, some longer term gigs planned in Hamburg at the Top 10 club at the time. But he said, that's it, I'm out anyway. So we said, we're going there in a week. You're really letting us down. He said, I don't care. He said, I'm getting out. I want to go to Canada. So he left. And in that, literally that week, we had to find a drummer who could sit in with some of our very complex arrangements that we had in those days, because we used to mash songs together. So we would do things like Vanilla Fudge, whatever they had a big hit with one or two others. And we would do all these complicated arrangements where we transitioned from one song into another, but there'd be proper sort of links, in them, and tempo changes and all that sort of thing. So we had to find a drummer who could do that. And we thought this is going to be impossible. So the bass player, the Welsh guy, said, I know a little drummer in Wales. He's of Italian extract. His brother is a really big actor in England. You may be aware of him. I'll tell you his name in a minute. The drummer's name was Henry Spinetti. So Henry Spinetti was 16 years old when we brought him to London to rehearse with us for a week before we went out to doing 8 hours a night at 8 hours, 4 hours on, 4 hours off, 1 hour at a time, at the Top 10 club in Hamburg, which is where the Beatles played and various other big bands of the time. They all cut their teeth on the Top 10 club and also the Star Club in Hamburg. So these two clubs were pretty close, within walking distance of each other. and we were booked to do the top 10 club for about 6 weeks. So it was going to be a really tough, grueling gig. And Henry managed to learn all of our arrangements amazingly well. For a 16-year-old, he was brilliant. Now, since then, Henry became a very big drummer in the UK. After, our band broke up, he went on to do sessions. He became Clapton's drummer. He worked with Ringo Starr, all kinds of artists in the UK. And he was on the George Harrison final tour. He knew the Beatles at that point, the remaining Beatles well. And his brother was a guy called Victor Spinetti, who was a very big actor in the UK. And he, too, was very intimate with the Beatles. He was in all of their movies, Hard Day's Night, 8 Days, what was it? 8 Days a Week? No.
8 Days a Week, Hard Day's Night.
What's the two movies? Hard Day's Night, what was the other one called?
Help. Was it Help?
Yeah, I think so. You need somebody, was it called Help? Anyway, those two big movies at the time, Victor Spinetti was in. So I knew Victor pretty well. And he was a strange guy. I won't go into the stories about him because he was pretty crazy. So that's that connection. Take me back to your question. Floribunda Rose. Wow.
Well, once you became Scrugg, you had the trio of singles, and I had comments on those. That's all right. Lavender Popcorn. That's a nice slice of pop psych. Incidentally, the title of the compilation CD on Castle, which I got, this one here.
Yeah. Yes, I know it. Yeah.
You know it well. I just showing it to the viewers. There's
Yeah.
the Lavender Popcorn, and that has everything from Scrugg and Floribunda Rose and your whole entire first album.
Wow.
On that too, and then some extra.
Could you showed that to the audience?
Yeah, and the other song that I like off of it, Everyone Can See. That one has a really nice melody. I think you
that
recall
too was a co-written song with Jack Russell, incidentally.
Okay.
Bass player. Yeah.
The only criticism I would say about that is I think the distorted guitar is a little over the top, is a little too much.
I don't even remember.
You don't remember that? Because it's
No.
kind of a mellow track, and then you hear this screeching guitar coming in. That's the only thing.
I wouldn't even listen to that old stuff. A lot of it would be embarrassing for me, and I think they were just. It's part of the history, but it's not great stuff,
Yeah. Well, the real Geraldine Stand Up and Be Counted. That's another one that I like. It's a nice track.
That one could have been something, and it was a sort of turntable. It played quite a lot on the BBC radio and so on. But no cigar.
Right. No cigar on that one either. Okay. Well, you did do a lot of gigging with Floribunda Rose and Scrugg. Played a lot of live shows. Any that stand out in your mind, thinking back?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I'll tell you one that really stands out is we were doing a gig just in Newcastle, I believe it was. It might have been slightly outside of Newcastle. So we traveled up there. Every gig that we did up there, we had to wake up at like 4 a.m, pack the van, get on the M4, get up there, unpack, do a sound test, do the gig, and you wound up back home at 6 the next morning. So it was pretty grueling, literally for no money, almost no money. It paid for petrol, basically. So we did this gig, and as we're standing on the stage in this town hall, I think it was, we were standing on stage about 6 feet above the crowd. A little fight started to break out between some of the Geordies and some Scots who'd come in, and it was a little fight, but it wound up like a John Wayne movie in the sense that there were waves in this large audience. You know, they were all dancing and standing around and stuff. And there were waves of this fight going on. So it was, but it was crazy. It was literally, you couldn't have filmed it more dramatically in a John Wayne movie than that. And we were just standing on stage thinking, oh God, we're going to be killed, you know, if this gets on, if somehow some of these guys come up on stage because they think we're whatever. But we just kept playing, and we came out of it unscathed. I don't remember how it all ended, but I think police arrived and, you know, arrested a bunch of people. So that was the kind of standout. And I was thinking, you know, the Brits, you think of it as a sort of more civilized society than perhaps the South African one, because I saw a bunch of that stuff in South Africa too when we were gigging, enormous fights all over the joint. But then to come and see some of the worst violence from a stage in England was an eye opener, you know. Yeah.
Well, I did want to, if it's all right with you, mention off of your first album, solo, Confusions About a Goldfish, from
Yeah.
69. First of all, you know, I like origins. Talk about the title. Where did that come from?
Came out of a joke.
Okay.
Though I came across this joke. It's a kind of, well, it's not a weak joke. It's sort of funny, but it's like an old dad joke. Two goldfish are in a bowl, and they're discussing the nature of God. And is there a God, or is there no God? And one of them says, of course there's a God. He says, well, how do you know? He says, if there's no God, who changes the water?
Yeah,
So,
right.
so
Right.
I took that little idea, that joke,
Uh-huh.
and in this, the lyric of the song is a reference to that, the changing of the water.
Yeah.
Because I was interested, I was starting to discover esoteric philosophical ideas when I was about 20 in the UK. It was very much part of the sort of mind broadening thing that was going on in the UK at the time. The Beatles and various of the other artists of the time, everyone was exploring, and a lot of them were doing it psychedelically. I, in fact, never ever took LSD, and virtually none of the other drugs, especially the dangerous ones. And I won't say what I did do, but we're talking 60s here, so one or two of the guys in the band smoked marijuana and so on. I never did. They wanted me to smoke marijuana. I said, nope, I ain't gonna do it. Because I grew up thinking that the integrity of my mind was important, and my mom was very kind of staunch on the subject, and she didn't want me to get in that, and somehow it's kind of stuck with me. Ultimately it sort of made sense. So, but at the same time, there are benefits to broadening your mind. So I'll leave you with that. So that was Confusions About a Goldfish. It was my stream of consciousness period, if you like.
Okay. Gotcha. One of the tracks on there that I enjoy is Deserts of Mountains of Men.
Right.
Yeah, I like the addition of the harpsichord on that one. That's really nice. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, as I remember. I know that the song was written by Chris Demetrio and myself. So Chris Demetrio was the Cypriot keyboard player that I brought from South Africa, who later went on to co-write Step On You Again with me, because we used to literally sit down every day. When the band broke up, Chris and I, who were good friends at the time, we would sit in my little bedsitter. I had two Revox recorders, and we would record. I would record, mainly guitar, and for drums, I would use a suitcase. That suitcase I still have, a little brown suitcase, and I would put a tambourine on it, and I would bang the suitcase, and I'd play it like.
Yeah.
So that was my set of drums, because we didn't have drums, and I couldn't make a big noise in the bedsitter anyway. So we would do demos every day for whoever. If Engelbert Humperdinck was going to be recording, we'd try to write something for Engelbert Humperdinck or any other one, and not necessarily for myself. And that's actually how Step on You Again came about as well. It was so Desert of Mountains of Men, just to get back to that, was a song that one of the songs that we wrote, and I recorded that and put it on that album. Chris was largely, was more the sort of lyricist. He would write lyrics, come to me with a lyric idea, usually just a verse or something, and then we would expand it in the day that we sat together. Again, trying to write for anyone and everyone, trying to get some success somehow.
Yeah. Tomorrow I'll Go. That's another. That's a beautiful song. It's got kind of
that one has a special place in my
good
heart.
Good.
And I can literally remember the day that I wrote it and the night that I did the demo, because my ex-wife, who is the person that I'm referring to in that song, was away for the day. She ran in fact, she ran a large modeling agency where she was initially a secretary to the owner of the thing. And then later she and one of the other girls bought the business. So they became owners of this model agency. And they had some pretty big, they had some of the biggest models in London in that agency. So Judy, my ex-wife, would run this model agency. So literally she'd get up in the morning early to leave for work, and I would sit in bed drinking some coffee with my flamenco guitar, which I still have, which I got in 1962, fantastic guitar. And I would literally try to write songs. And I wrote Tomorrow I'll Go that one day, and did the demo that night. And it's a song very close to reality. There's one line in it I regret, but yeah, it's a nice song. It's a lovely, I think it's a great song.
Yes, it is. It is.
And I can't say that about all of my songs, other than the ones which I've yet to release.
Right. Touche. Well, Amendment to Confusions About a Goldfish. That's a nice track. I like the country flavored guitar in that one.
Yes, there was a sort of country, as you say, country flavored amendments to the that. In other words, I guess what was in my mind was forget about all the complexities of philosophy and esotericism and the rest. It's it's much simpler than that. Ultimately, I guess that's the message of the song.
Message of the song. And as I messaged you before, Seat by the Window is my favorite off of that album.
That's nice. Yeah, that's actually close to being a reasonable song, because it's got a sort of Paul Simon-y feel about it.
Right.
And that too was a lyric that started with Chris Demetrio, and I like that song. I wouldn't mind redoing it.
Right. It also reminds me of the Fred Neil's "Everybody's Talking." Kind of that.
Oh yeah! Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Rambling, traveling type of
yeah.
song. Yeah. Anyway, back to your you were building your recording studio at the time of working on your second solo album. So
yes.
Talk a little bit about that. How long did it take you to get your studio all put together?
Wow. Yeah. So we bought this house, my wife and I. We bought this house in 1970. The house was the front part of what had been the greengrocer's shop in Mortlake, on the border of Mortlake and Barnes. Pretty hip areas. Barnes was known as Little Chelsea. So bought this little house, which I paid £8,500 for. Got a mortgage, because now I knew that I had money coming, because I had one or two big hits in Germany with Dalia Lavi, who was an Israeli-German singer. So I had a #1 out there with the song. In German it was called "O wann kommst du." In English, it was called "Won't You Join Me." I've never released my version of the song. I think it's actually it's a very commercial song. and her version of it went to #1 and stayed there for 6 weeks in Germany, and sold 1 million, and which was big for Germany. And it gave me the financial stability then, and so that I could look forward to doing something. So I bought the house because I always wanted a studio. I was tired of paying studio prices, because I changed my contract with my record company to where I was financing my own records for a higher royalty. That higher royalty was still a piddly little sum. Percentage was frighteningly low by today's standards. So I changed my deal whereby I would now be paying costs. So every time that Gus Dudgeon, my producer, was there, who was, a very big producer, he produced all the Elton John albums. He produced one of the David Bowie tracks, Space Oddity. But he was a very big producer, very wealthy guy. And we would sit in the studio, and he was a really funny guy, and he would tell these stories, these funny jokes and stories, and kept everyone in stitches. But at this point, it was now costing me money for him to tell his jokes and stories. So I used to actually have to say to him, "Gus, stop for a while. I'm paying costs here. Can we just move on with the record?" So I decided, wait a minute, this is crazy. With every 2 or 3 or 4 hours that I do at Trident Studios, I could be buying a microphone. And I decided that was it from then on. So we built this house. It had a greengrocer's shop. It had a large basement, which was literally an earth-floored basement with very damp walls, because we were 2 blocks away from the Thames River. So all the houses there, if they had basements, most of them didn't, they would be kind of damp-ish, So I decided that I wanted to build a studio there, and I got this is a little sideways anecdote. So I had been in contact. I was aware of a guy called Dick Swettenham, and he was a mad scientist, genius guy who built Helios mixing desks. I never had a Helios, but I did have Trident desks, which I bought directly from Malcolm Toft, who developed the Trident mixing boards. So whoever I spoke to about the studio said, well, why don't you talk to Dick Swettenham, because he knows about all this stuff, and see what he has to say about you building a studio. So he comes over to the house, takes one look at where I want to put the studio, and says, forget it. I said, why? He said, because you'll never be able to build a studio here. He said, it's a terrible place. You've got wooden floors above. It's in the basement. It's damp. He says, you'll never be able to make records here. I said, I really want to. I want to build a studio. He said, no, forget it. As far as I'm concerned, forget it. So I went ahead, despite his negativity, and I just started to talk to a few guys, got some people to come and work, and I mucked in, and we built this studio, soundproofed this 20 by 20 room, as well as damp proofing all the walls and that sort of thing. Within about a year or 2, we had our first #1 out of the studio, which was a song by Dexy's Midnight Runners called Gino. I think it was called Gino, and it was about Gino Washington, who was, I think, an artist, a recording artist. So Dexy's Midnight Runners was during the sort of punk era of the UK punk type stuff. Yeah. And I had a lot of those bands come down to the studio, and we had our first #1 out of the studio. And it was produced by a guy called Pete Wingfield, who was a great piano player and a good friend. Excellent, very, very fast producer kind of guy. Not too finicky about getting every sound exactly right. He just wanted to move on with the spirit of what was going on. And I liked his way of making records, as opposed to I worked with Mutt Lange quite a lot. You know Mutt Lange?
Yeah.
Okay, so I worked with Mutt Lange quite a lot, and Mutt was completely the opposite. He sat for 18 hours trying to get the snare drum sound, literally, and not exaggerating. So I liked the quicker way of working, but I kind of cut my teeth on the Gus Dudgeon, Mutt Lange approach, which was much more finicky. And I've tried. When you have a studio time, work expands to fill the time available, kind of scenario. So, the more time you've got, the longer you keep it going. But sometimes quicker is better. What were we talking about? How did that?
Was that when it was renamed Tapestry Studios, or was it still?
It was always called Tapestry from the start, because I loved the album by whatever her name was. Carole King, yeah. So I loved that album, but also because Mortlake, which is where the studio was in London, was well known in the world of actual tapestries, because there was a tapestry factory studio in Mortlake, which went back hundreds of years. So we thought, there's a nice connection. We're in Mortlake, love the album Tapestry, and let's call it Tapestry Studio. So that's how that came about.
Okay. Well, going back to your Kongos album from '72,
mm-hmm.
It contained two of your most popular and familiar songs, which we talked about, or you mentioned, He's Gonna Step on You Again,
mm-hmm.
and Tokoloshi Man.
Right now, but just by the way, it's pronounced Tokolosh Man.
Tokolosh.
Yeah, there are all kinds of pronunciations out there that people use, but the South African way to pronounce it is Tokolosh.
Tokolosh. Okay, mm-hmm. And they were both songs were also released as singles.
Right.
A couple of other artists that are favorites of mine that recorded at Tapestry were Thomas Dolby.
Yes, yeah.
And Sinead O'Connor, who passed away.
Right.
Too long ago. Yeah, both.
Yeah, I can fill in one or two little gaps there. Yeah. I had this girl who worked for me as my studio booker manager person. She took all the bookings and did the invoices and all that sort of thing. So she was about 19 when my wife was 19. So she's like 12 years younger than me. And we were very good friends. She was a lovely girl, and her boyfriend was Thomas Dolby. So I met Thomas casually quite a few times. I knew that he was a songwriter, singer-songwriter, and a sort of talented guy. I never took him seriously until he came over to my house and he brought a 4-track demo, a TIAC 4-track, so those cassette 4-track machines, and on which he had done a bunch of these songs, about 6 songs, one of which I remember was a song called Urges, I think, and then one or two others. I don't think She Blinded Me with Science was on that tape. But he came to me and he wanted a job. He was 19 at the time. And he wanted a job as a tape op, a so-called tape op. In those days, tape ops were literally, they would thread the tape on the machines, they'd press play, they'd press stop. We didn't even have remote controls at the time. So, you told your guy hit play, taught him to do editing and that sort of thing of tape. But his main function was to make tea and coffee for the artists and the producers. So he wanted that job, and I said, Thomas, I've listened to your tape. You're not going to be a tape op. You're not going to be an engineer in the studio for someone else. I said, you could be a star, and you're going to want to be a star, whatever happens. I know that. I can see it. I said, I can't give you the job, because it's just going to be wasting your time and mine to kind of have you in the studio when you're not going to be happy being there, because it's not going to fulfill you. What you want to do is to keep making your songs, demos, and all that. He saw it as a means to an end, and I thought it's not going to work. So we remained friends, but I didn't give him the job. Within 6 months from that conversation, he came back to my studio as an artist and made the album, which he made his first album with a guy called an American producer called Wally Brill. Okay. I don't know if you know of him.
Yeah.
He was an American living in London at the time, very nice guy. And he was married to an English singer called Annabelle Lamb, Lambe, possibly, or just Lamb. And we actually went to his wedding when they married. We went to that wedding, lovely out in the country kind of thing. Very four weddings and a funeral type setting. It was a great wedding, and she was a very nice person. So was he, and he came to the studio to produce the Thomas Dolby album.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right.
His name is Wally Brill, Brill.
Yes, I have heard of him. Yes, Wally Brill.
Yeah.
We'll talk about earlier. You worked with the band Carmen.
Oh, yeah.
Quite a bit of their material.
Yeah.
And they had the Glasscock brothers, the John, which was the played in Jethro Tull. Was in
Okay, I don't remember the names of the personnel of the band, other than the girl. What was her name? She was a very attractive girl. Tony Visconti produced one of their albums at my studio, Fandango in Space or something like that.
Angela Allen. Angela?
Yeah, Angela.
There we go.
So Tony Visconti, who was a very good friend of mine, used my studio a lot. His wife was at the time was Mary Hopkins. So yeah. Mary Hopkins was a good friend of ours, and she also recorded a few of my songs, which Tony produced. But Tony was, as I say, a good friend, brought a whole bunch of people to the studio, and one of them was this band called Carmen, who were very good. They had this lovely mix. There were some American, I think mostly Americans, if I'm not mistaken. And they had this lovely mix of flamenco and rock, not new age, but new style rock and so on. So that was a good thing. What can I tell you about that? Other than there were nice sessions. I don't remember too much of the detail, and I cannot remember the personnel other than Angela.
I'll talk about the TV jingle writing. Several that I've interviewed on this did that, either as a side business or when they got out of music.
Yeah.
Very lucrative for a while there.
Well, yeah, you see, in those days, you had people of all the major publishing companies would have racks, shelves full of actual albums of so-called mood music or standard library music. So in those days, you couldn't go online and listen to stuff and say, there's a piece that I'd like to use in an ad or in a movie or whatever. They had to literally go there, play the record or borrow the records, take them home and listen to decide whether they could use that piece of music or not. The other way, of course, was to go to an agent who could commission artists. She would have, in my case, a woman called Sue Manning, again, a great, really effective person. She was my agent for jingles. So she would call me up and say, okay, we need a Danish bacon commercial, and here are the parameters. Here's what they're looking for. And I got about 50% of whatever I pitched for. So I was fairly successful at doing that. Partly because I had a studio and I could do more sophisticated demos than most of the people who were writing for it, There were some very successful guys. A good friend of mine who's now passed on, a guy called Alan Hawkshaw, was one of the most successful.
Oh, wow.
He was a keyboard player, artist, made his own records and things like that, but very, very active guy. He came to live in the States, and I believe he became a born-again Christian here in the States, which was totally a surprise to me because he wasn't that kind of guy. Anyway, he died in the States not too long ago. Nice guy. So he too, amongst others, Mike Darbo, for instance. You remember Mike Darbo from Manfred Mann?
Yes.
Okay, so Mike Darbo also recorded a bunch of stuff in my studio, and nice guy again. And he was signed to Sue Manning as well as a jingle writer. So Chris Demetrio, who was my friend, co-writer, produced an album of Mike Darbo, and he did part of that at my studio. And I played guitar and stuff on it and so on. So that's how I got into the jingle thing.
Okay. And then real quickly, how did you become involved in composing music for film? And what are some of your compositions that you're most proud of?
Well, the one that came about um, kind of coincidentally, somewhat later in the I guess it would have been about 1970. Actually, it was about 1977, 78. Alan Klein, who was the manager of the Beatles, famous, infamous guy,
Yeah.
he came to my publisher, David Platts, Essex Music, who was one of the biggest independent publishers in the UK. And David was, and to this day, his son is still my partner in the company called Tapestry Music. So I have a publishing company in the UK called Tapestry Music, and David passed away, and his son runs that company. I mean, that amongst many other companies. It's under the umbrella of, it was under the umbrella of Essex Music. It's now called Bucks Music, stands for Buckminster. So it's called Bucks Music. The original Essex Music was connected to a company in the States called the Richmond Organization. The Richmond Organization and Essex Music, David Platts, they fell out. So they had a very acrimonious parting involving, a big, long court company as to who owned what and so on. Alan Klein came over to London, spoke to David Platts, saying he was making a movie it was to be called The Greek Tycoon, based on a book that a guy called Nico Mastorakis, wrote. And it's, obviously it's about the Kennedys and Aristotle and Nassus and so on. So he was making this movie. And he said to David, we're looking for a taverna scene piece of music. He said, so put it out to some of your writers and see if, who can come up with what. So David said, you're the only Greek that I know that I've got under contract. He said, see if you can come up with a piece of music. So I did. I came up with a piece of music which I had written much earlier as two different songs. And I put the two parts together. And I made this instrumental for a taverna scene. So it had a kind of Zorba the Greek type sound about it. Yeah. I presented that as a demo to David. He presented it to Alan Klein. Alan Klein liked it. And during the filming of the Greek Tycoon with Anthony Quinn and Jacqueline Bisset, they were in Mykonos. And they were doing some scenes in a taverna, and they put this music on. Everybody loved the music, and people started to whisper to the producer and the director. They said, there's your theme. That's the theme for the film. I didn't submit it as a theme for the film. I submitted it as a taverna scene. Okay. So they all agreed, and Alan agreed, yes, this is a great tune. Let's make it the theme. So it became the theme, and then Alan came to me and said, let's get some lyrics happening. So he told me, he pointed in the direction of what he wanted. And again, I took some old lyrics that I'd had from the song, and I started then to meld it into a kind of story of Onassis. So I wrote that lyric, and I recorded at my own expense, a rather nice, lush recording of it at my studio with 16, I could only fit 16 string players into the studio very tightly. And I recorded my version of it. It was supposed to go on the end of the film. I paid for everything because I knew that it would be well worth it for me. I didn't even need to ask Alan for any money for that. I just said, I'll do it because I want ownership of it. So I recorded that, and it was supposed to go on the end of the film. At the end of the day, they decided to use just the instrumental version in various forms in the film, and they used the orchestral version of it at the very end of the film instead of my vocal version. So I've never released my vocal version, and I actually want to because it's not bad. Yeah. And a lot of requests for this song, the theme for the Greek Tycoon. A lot of people have covered it. What's her name? Downtown.
Petula Clark.
Petula Clark, yeah. She came to the office at Essex Music saying she wanted to record the song, or the Greek Tycoon song, or they reached out to her saying, we want you to record the song. So they presented my vocal demo to her, and she recorded it as a double A side, both sides being the Greek Tycoon song, one in English and one in French, and they released it. And it did fairly well, not a big hit, because the film actually was a lousy movie. It turned out to be not a great movie, in spite of the fact that they spent at the time $6 million in the production of it, which in the 70s was a pretty big budget. So we all went to the premiere in New York. I mean, when I say we all, I mean Shelley and I went to the premiere, and we were going to meet Anthony Quinn and Jacques Bisset. And Anthony Quinn was amongst the top two people that I ever wanted to meet, Marlon Brando being possibly number one, and Anthony Quinn being number two. And they did not come to the premiere because I guess they started to get wind after all the reviews of the film that it wasn't going to, that it was going to it was going to be panned. So they then decided, okay, we're not going to go to the premiere. So, which was a bummer because everybody else came.
Yeah. Right. That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Those things happen. Wow. Yeah. I know.
Well, if that movie was a hit, I'd have a much bigger studio right here in Austin, Texas.
Right. Exactly. Yes, you would. Well, everything happens for a reason, right, John?
So they say. Yep.
So they say. So when did you relocate to Phoenix? When was it that you moved to Phoenix?
Well, we were in London at the time. We had three sons, Shelley and I, all born in London. We had a fourth on the way. He was at about eight months at the time that we moved with Shelley, my wife, being pregnant with him. He's the guitar player in Congas, Danny. So we decided that England was not working for us anymore with three boys and one more kid on the way. Didn't know boy or girl, because it just wasn't a great life for them. You had to dress them up in snowsuits in the winter, and I don't know, boots and Wellingtons, and then you get outside and they'd be freezing and want to get back into the house. It was getting to be really boring to have these boys with not a lot of space and not a lot of sunshine. So it had its benefits, England, but those were not them. So we said, okay, let's get out of here. We're going to go to the States, but before we go to the States, we're going to go to South Africa for a year or two because my mom was ill, was sick. So we said, let's go to South Africa, have the fourth boy born there. They'll all be American citizens anyway, because of by virtue of Shelley being an American. So we left London, and literally a month later, our fourth son was born in South Africa. We had to get special permission from our doctor to travel. He said, but only if you go tomorrow. He said, if you go the next day, he said, I'm not giving you permission. So we said, that's it. We're on a plane. And we packed up. We had packed up the studio. I sold everything, and prior to this, and we moved. So that's that. That's when we moved to South Africa, and it was only to be for a year or two. It wound up to be 8 years, some of the best years that our boys ever experienced, because we were involved. They went to the Greek school out there. It was a Greek supported school. Because we looked at all the schools, we didn't like them. They were all uptight and sort of just didn't accommodate our kids. Our kids were we wanted them to be artistic and have music and all that stuff. And so my mom actually suggested this little Greek school. I thought it was a little Greek school. As it turned out, it was a big school, and supported and created partly by the guy who was Nelson Mandela's lawyer, a guy called George Bizos.
Oh,
so George Bizos was considered to be one of the great human rights lawyers of the 20th century. He was a Greek, and he kind of saved Mandela being executed because they were in university together and good friends. George Bizos, the Greek, and Nelson Mandela, the Black. And he kind of saved his life because Mandela was due to make a final speech at his trial, and in which he said, I am willing to die for my convictions. And these are my convictions. And he was, at that time he was convicted of being part of groups planting bombs in South Africa on Johannesburg Station and that sort of thing. To which he acknowledged. He said, we tried, the ANC tried everything else to get South Africa to redress the apartheid system, and nothing has worked. So we've had to resort to violence. So they were gonna hang him. And George Bizos said, I would add this little part to your statement. He said, don't say I'm willing to die. He said, add the words if needs be. Supposedly, that made a big difference to the result of the sentence. He was going to be sentenced to death. Yeah. But because of those added words, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. So the rest is history. He was sent to Robben Island off the Cape, and he was there for 27 years. And then later he was released when South African government realized that he should not die in prison, because that was going to create a bigger problem for them than releasing Mandela. Yeah. So they released Mandela, and of course he became leader of South Africa.
If need be, I like that. Just those words.
If needs be, I think there was an S. Yeah.
Yeah. If that made all the difference. Wow.
Yeah. So look up George Bizos. It's spelled Bizos. Bezos. He's a great person. He's dead. Mm-hmm. We knew him very well. He died at the age of 90 something, and I was kind of intimately involved with the school because I became chairman of the PTA by some strange coincidence. And then later I was on the board of the school, so that we made policy. And because I was the only one with a laptop computer at the time, I also took all the notes, and we redid the constitution of the school because I was typing it out.
Yeah. Well, so you were tired of the cold and the rainy and the winters in England, and then you decide to relocate someplace completely opposite, Phoenix, Arizona.
Correct.
Well, you get the hot summers.
Yeah. To give you a flavor of how that came about, I'm just trying to get my computer restarted. Yeah. To give you a flavor of how that came about, we had bought this house in a lovely area of Johannesburg, and it was directly opposite one of the oldest golf clubs in the country, called the Royal Johannesburg Golf Club. And we literally were opposite the exit gate of that club. So we could walk across with golf clubs and be on the golf course in a matter of like 4 minutes. And it was really, really quiet during the week, so we loved it. And one Monday, we'd finished all the renovations to our house, which were extensive. I built a studio at the house, completely redid the house completely, and it was a big place. So we decided to play golf one Monday morning. We went over there. During that year, the previous 9 months of that year, 4 Greeks were killed violently in their businesses that were friends of ours, and who had kind of shops and supermarkets and that sort of thing. And they were killed in robberies and or hijackings. And it was going on at a ridiculous rate. So we were playing golf, and we looked back at the house. We said, wow, isn't this paradise? This is Shelley and me. This is paradise. Look at that. We finished all the work. We're playing golf right across the road. Isn't it lovely? So she said, yeah, it's lovely. And I said, but you know what? I think we got to go. I said, because it's too crazy. We can't bring up our kids.
Right.
It's too, we could wind up dead and they could wind up parentless.
Let me
So
ask you real quick. Was that politically motivated, those crimes at that
they
time?
were partly politically motivated, but crime has always been rampant in South Africa and in many places in Africa and Detroit and
Yeah.
other areas of the States, Chicago, you name it,
I was
because of
just
poverty. Because of
yeah, I
poverty.
was just curious because of targeting Greeks. That's why I was saying, was it political?
They just happened to be in the front line very often because they were cash businesses. So they were soft targets. It wasn't an office an office building where you had to go through security to get into the thing, and then there wouldn't be any cash that they could lift. So the Greek businesses were soft targets.
Okay. So at that point, we need to get out of here.
Yeah, it was not directed necessarily at Greeks. They were no different from any other whites in South Africa. They were just, as far as the South African poor blacks were concerned, it was just a way to elevate themselves.
Yeah. So then you did move to. How long were you in Phoenix? How long did you live in Phoenix?
25 years.
Ooh.
And whenever the question arises, I say I wish we'd moved to Texas at the start instead of 25 years in Phoenix. Much as we enjoyed Phoenix, we were in a place called Paradise Valley, which was a lovely place in Phoenix, Arizona. It was fine. We built a really nice studio there, managed to get a bigger house than we had in South Africa. I thought it was going to seriously downsize, but somehow we managed to buy at the right time. And nobody wanted this giant house that we bought. It was just not suitable for anyone except someone wanting a nice big studio. So I built my studio there, and the boys made their first 3 albums there. And it was a 3,000 square foot space of studio with sort of recreation area and so on. They did all their videos there. I bought all the stuff for them. I said, we're not going to rent studios. We're not going to rent video people. If you want to make a video, you do it. I'll get the cameras and stuff. So that's the way that they developed. They became really au fait with everything that they do. From the writing of a song, the concept of the song, the singing, the writing, the playing, the mixing, the recording, the video making. They did everything.
It's all their own thing.
So they're clever dudes, and
Yeah.
in fact, they are my go-to tech people these days.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that must make you a pretty proud papa. Having your sons kind of following your footsteps in a way.
We joke, Shelley and I. We say we use the rubber hammer method because it leaves no marks. But we insisted that they do music, and that was piano. They had to do piano, each of them, because we knew that if you got the basics of piano, you could then decide to be a musician, and you could decide to play anything you wanted to play. So that was the philosophy, and it worked extremely well.
Yeah, and you couldn't be more proud. I'm sure. Well, my aunt who passed away, she had 5 boys. You have 4, so it's like there's that male gene in both family, and both families like that. But yeah, I think they had wanted a girl. I think that's why they tried. And they tried so many times, and then they kept having boys.
Yeah, we did the same thing. We thought, well, the 4th one has got to be a girl, surely,
Yeah.
And no, it was a boy. And so we decided, okay, no more. I mean, it would have worked to have another boy or a girl, because the boys had to farm out some of the bass playing in the early stages of their career. And then once we got rid of that bass player, we started then to use a bass track, So it became more sort of technology. These days, they want to do everything live, on stage, and they're in fact recording. They're currently recording re-recording an album that they did, but they're doing it completely differently, all acoustic and live, as opposed to the way they did it first time round, as a sort of 10-year anniversary of one of the albums that they did.
Wow. And how
I'll
many years have they been recording and playing together? How many years?
Well, they started literally when they were kids. In the South African studio, I bought them all Fender-like guitars. They weren't Fenders, and drums and all sorts of things. And they were learning piano. So they got into the whole studio thing in South Africa when Danny was literally 6 years old or so. He was the youngest guy, and they had to wait for him to sort of grow up before he could be part of the band. But the rest of them were all beginning, particularly the two older boys, were beginning to get into the technology of it all. And then when we got to Phoenix, they went to ASU to study in the jazz program, which they only did for about a year and a half each. That's the older boy and the second oldest. And they said, you know what? We're wasting hours every day going down to ASU, where they have inferior equipment that we can work on, just to sit in with some guys or learn, be with the jazz master and so on, who they learned a lot from. But they said, we think we're wasting time. We'd rather be at home in the studio actually doing stuff. So I acquiesced to that. I said, okay, let's save the time and come and work in the studio, which they did.
And they haven't looked back. Yeah.
No, they haven't. They had big success. It took them around the world. They're now, unfortunately, they had one of those records that the single particularly was one of those records that was so big that it became synonymous. People would know the record, but not the band. And they found it very difficult to sort of follow up on. So they've done 6 or 7 albums in total, all of which is really good stuff, most of which is good stuff. Unfortunately, many people who know Kongos only know them through that 1 or 2 songs. But in fact, they've got much more sophisticated material than that.
Yeah. And where all do they live?
Well, that's the thing. They moved to LA when we were in Phoenix. They decided that they needed to be where it was happening. Phoenix was a bit slow. So they all moved to LA. I don't know what year that was, about 2011, 12, maybe, or a little bit after that. And then when the pandemic happened, or was starting to happen, they decided LA was a lousy place to be. So 2 of them came back through to Phoenix and they stayed at our house. We were away in South Africa on the day the pandemic was announced in South Africa. So Shelley and I were out there for like 8 months, in lockdown for 2 or 3 of those months. And they then stayed at our house in Phoenix to get out of LA because they had, at that point, we had 1 grandkid and they didn't want her to be exposed to whatever was happening in California and LA and so on. Also, they didn't like the way that LA was developing. Literally, they come out of their space in Hollywood where they had a studio. They were renting a space there where they were living, a smallish house, but they had good space for a studio. And there'd be bodies all over the place, just sleeping on the sidewalks and so on. So they said, okay, this is no way to bring up kids. And they came back to Phoenix. Then, 3 years ago, 2000, whatever that was, 12, 13, about 2011, I think. No, not 11, 21. I mean, we decided to relocate to Austin. So Joey, my oldest son, was married to a girl who was born in Midland, Texas. And her mother lives in Travis County on the lake. So Joey said, well, okay, so I'm going to be the spearhead and we're going to go live in Austin. And I said, Austin has always been one of my favorite places. So we'll follow you. We'll do it. So they came, they bought in Dripping Springs. They've got 2 acres up there, and he's got a really nice studio. It's bigger than mine. Nice. He's got a lot of my stuff. And we bought a house literally 15 minutes away in on the way to Austin. We're in Austin. We're in South Austin, basically. And then the guitarist and the bass player, Dylan, bought 15 acres in Wimberley.
Okay, right.
I'll send you a link to what he's doing at the moment. It's really great.
Okay.
It's an Instagram link, and he has something which is called Songland Farms out there, because he's always been interested in farming as well as, you know, music and bass playing and so on. So he and his wife, she's a very good artist. She's Canadian, and she sings. They formed a little band, a little group called Garden, Gardyn. But in addition to that, you know, he's very much part of Congress, and but then doing these really special things with vegetables and so on. Organic vegetables and so on. So at his 15-acre joint, I'll send you a link. It's kind of interesting. They have one of their almost immediate neighbors, maybe one over, is Paul Simon, who has some hundreds of acres apparently.
Yeah.
And so Paul Simon will occasionally, they've not met him yet, unfortunately. He will go down and he'll do stuff at the radio station down there. Paul Simon, I mean, and the boys have also been on that radio station interview. So that's that. So then the guitarist came through. He's in South Austin, and now in the next 4 months, we hope that the plans are that Jesse will be here, the drummer. He's got 3 kids, and he'll be in Austin, Texas. So then the band will be able to get back to live performances, which stopped at the start of COVID.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, yeah, it's starting to open up a little bit more. I hear, you know, and there's more and more live shows.
Yeah,
starting to happen. So yeah, people are getting out and about. Yep. So, well, take us on a little tour of your studio. I said that we would do that at the end of this. Show us your guitars and the control board and the mixing board.
When I sold my house in Phoenix, I had what was then the only Disclavier grand piano of its size in Arizona. And the guy who bought the house, when he walked in, you know, it was very difficult to sell that house because it was enormous. And also it had this 3,000 square foot studio space downstairs, which most people just couldn't see a use for, you know. So we had to find that one buyer, you know, which has always been the case for our houses because I've always had a studio. So this guy walked in and was interested, liked the house and all that. And when he went down to the studio, he said, okay, he said, I'll take it. He said, but he said, I want that piano too. So I said, whoa. He said, first of all, that piano is a really expensive piano and I'm not going to give it to you, but I said, I'll sell it to you. So we agreed on a price and the piano stayed there. And I kind of hated having to lose that Disclavier piano because it was one of a kind. So I bought one here. And this is not a grand, but it's an upright. I'll show it to you. Let me switch the camera around.
All right.
So it's a great piano, and these pianos, by the way, this particular Yamaha Disclavier piano is made at one factory in Tokyo. And in order to make these pianos, you need to be a 20-year veteran of piano building within Yamaha. So Yamahas are made all over the world, but the high-level Yamaha Disclaviers are made at this one factory. So let me just show you. Well, first of all, I'll tell you what it can do. Every key has 127 levels of dynamics. So that is recorded in MIDI. This is a real piano.
Yeah.
As you can see, you know, it acts like a normal piano. But in there, can you see those little red lights? Okay, so the whole thing has got fiber optics. You know what a disc clavier is, do you?
Yes, yes, I do. Yes.
Okay, so there are fiber optics that control the mechanism. Don't ask me to explain how they control the mechanism.
Okay.
But the software has become much more sophisticated, even since I sold my other piano. So theoretically, someone can be sitting in London or Paris, and they can be playing a MIDI keyboard, and that information can be sent down the internet to me. I send it out to this piano, and this piano will play exactly
We'll play it.
what the
Wow.
guy is doing in London or Paris.
Wow.
Whatever I play on the piano can be recorded to my DAW, and I can then manipulate it and send it back to the piano, having sped it up or fixed up bum notes and that sort of thing. So it's fantastic from that point of view. Because I play piano, but I'm not a great pianist, but I do write on piano.
Yeah.
Other than that, got a whole bunch of guitars that the place is still fairly messy in the sense that I'm still clearing up backlog of stuff.
Yeah. So your favorite guitars. Show some a few of your favorite guitars.
Well, for different reasons. As I said, the Les Paul is great. I don't even play it much now, but if you'll see it on the Come With Me Now video, Danny is playing it. I've got Fenders all over the joint. This is an interesting guitar, not inexpensive, but some South Africans.
Wow, I've seen something like that before. Yeah, yeah. Wow.
So yeah, this South African company called Bohemian Guitars, because in South Africa you will often see people walking down the road with a homemade guitar out of an oil can, with a neck, that they might have bought or even made, and they'll play a kind of real cheapo tin guitar. Yeah. So they decided to market them, and on one of the boys' tours, they bought about 100 of them to hand out for VIP, for the VIP people who would pay extra for the show, after the show and that sort of thing.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
So we got a bunch of those. This is a very special guitar. I wrote many songs on it. It's a flamenco guitar, which I bought in 1962, and it was made, I bought it new in 62, and it was made by a family called Ramirez, and that this family was in the guitar making business for 200 years at that time, so about 260 years now. And they're still around, and they're very sought after, kind of expensive instruments. There is a 61 Strat right there. It's again, a very collectible guitar. And then these are, some of them somewhat collectible, but not as collectible as the ones that I mentioned. Then in the house, I've got about another 6, 8, 10 guitars. And of course, extensive alarm systems and that sort of thing, so that nobody can come lift my instruments.
Right. Okay. Well, again, thanks, John, and be sure if you, I'm going to thank Henry too for hooking us up, Henry Jensen Franson.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. That's how I I contacted him. You be sure and thank him, and then he told me, he said he thought that you might be interested. So
yeah, I'm trying to remember even how that came about. How were you aware of him?
I just looked up on G-Men. On the internet, and then looked up the members. That's how I get in touch with a lot of these people. And then I'll look on Facebook and I'll say, well, this has to be the same guy. I mean, how many people have Henry Jensen Franson? I mean, or name that, And then I even saw a picture of him, in the band. So I'm like, on his Facebook, I'm like, okay, that's him. I know that's him.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. I mean, he literally is, he's one of my oldest friends, and he's older than me, but also we've known each other since we were at school. So, not many left alive.
Right. He said he said, I'm 80 in February and the memory is a little scratchy. so 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 he said, Johnny Kongos is in the USA, blah blah blah. He might be more interested, he might be interested in the chat. So
Yeah,
that's how, yeah, that's
very
how
nice.
so anyway, all right, John. Well, appreciate it again, and thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for brushing off some of those cobwebs upstairs. And
Thank you, Greg. Great talking to you. And
all right.
you certainly seem to know your history of artists. So there you go.
That's right. I do a little research,
Yeah.
sometimes that always
Okay.
helps. All right. Well, you
All
take
right.
care and have a good week. Okay, John.
You too. Thanks, Greg.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.